I've got the all clear that we're good to start. I'm going to turn it over to the presider.
Thank you, Toby. So now that we have the message to start, let's call the case of Steve Rogers versus Drew Mars. Good afternoon, everybody, or good morning, as the case may be. My name is Judge Gottfried. I'm going to thank you all in advance for your patience and flexibility with any technical glitches that might arise, which I'm sure are probably inevitable. But to keep things running smoothly, I'm going to try to adhere pretty close to the script that they've given us, with the exception of any objections or anything that you might raise during the trial. So at this point, scoring judges, please look to the two buttons on the lower left of your screen. And just remember, as you're doing now, to keep your audio and video off unless Toby tells you otherwise. You should have your video set to hide all non-video participants. And that means that the only people who should be appearing on the screen right now, on your screen right now, are the advocates and me, which is the case for me, but hopefully you have that on your screen as well. So can the attorneys please start by making appearances, starting with the plaintiff?
Yes, Your Honor. Good afternoon. My name is Madeline Driscoll, and along with my co-counsel, Mr. Matt Bestman.
Good afternoon, Your Honor.
We represent the plaintiff in today's case, Miss Stevie Rogers.
Defense?
Yes, Your Honor. Hello. My name is Bruno Pais-LeMay, and I, along with my colleague, Mr. Norman Greenwell,
good afternoon, Your Honor,
represent the respondent in today's matter, Miss Drew Mars.
Good afternoon, Your Honor.
All right. Good afternoon, everyone. And do we have any pretrial matters to attend to before opening statements?
Yes, Your Honor. The plaintiff does have a few things to address. First, Your Honor, pursuant to pretrial ruling number 14, all witnesses barring party representatives have been sequestered in today's trial. Our party representative for the purposes of that rule is Miss Stevie Rogers.
Noted. Is there any objection?
No, Your Honor. We would just like to note that our party representative is Ms. Drew Mars.
Next, Your Honor, pursuant to pretrial ruling number 17, exhibits 1 through 7 have been pre-admitted today, and either side may refer to those exhibits at any time.
All right. And is that your understanding as well?
Yes, Your Honor, just that it's pretrial order 16, I believe.
Okay.
And Your Honor, one final thing. We have a question regarding the format. Because of the format, we're going to be showing exhibits on the screen throughout today's trial. Now, is it all right if we show those exhibits constructively outside of the eyes of the jury before they have been admitted into evidence?
That would be fine. I think I can't think of any other way to do it. So I think that would be fine.
Yes, Your Honor. Thank you. And with that, the plaintiff is ready to go.
Any pretrial matters from the defense?
Yes, Your Honor. While normally in deference to the court, we'd stand during all examinations and speeches given, today's unique circumstances would call for us to ask to use discretion whether we sit or stand.
Understood. I think the rule is that the students may choose to sit or stand as your preference may be, and the court has no preference.
Yes, Your Honor. And lastly, we advise the court that if at any moment Your Honor can't see or hear us, so please feel free to interrupt, and we'll get that taken care of right away.
Okay, noted. I will. If at any point any student drops off due to technical difficulties, we will pause the trial until we're able to resolve that. Anything else?
Defense is ready to go, Your Honor.
And anything else from either party?
No, Your Honor.
All right.
No.
In that case, we will hear opening statements from each party. For the scoring judges, everybody should make sure that they are in speaker view. That button is at the top right of your screen. And attorneys, please remember to mute your audio when the other attorney is speaking. And I will do the same. Now you may proceed.
Yes, Your Honor. May it please the court. It wasn't enough. It's August 15th, 2018. The defendant, a woman named Drew Mars, wakes up early. She's a live-in caretaker for an elderly woman named Agatha Lee. And so on that morning, she goes into Miss Lee's bedroom. When the defendant walks into the room, she sees Agatha Lee lying lifeless in her bed. Miss Lee's not moving. She's not breathing. There's no pulse, but members of the jury, you'll learn the defendant's not worried. She's not surprised. She's not upset. You'll learn today the defendant's not worried because she already knew Agatha Lee would be dead. The defendant's not worried because she was the one who killed her. You see, Agatha Lee was a very wealthy woman. You'll learn today that her estate was worth more than $20 million. She used some of that money to make sure the defendant had a comfortable life. You'll learn Miss Lee put the defendant through school, paid her a generous salary, gave her free room, free board, but for the defendant, well, that money wasn't enough. That's because you'll learn the defendant had a sister who was deathly ill. The treatment for that illness was extremely expensive. Even with the defendant's generous salary, well, she just couldn't afford it. But you learn the defendant wasn't worried, at least not yet. That's because she was Agatha Lee's sole inheritor. Now, this meant that if Agatha Lee were to die, the defendant would get her $20 million. Now that would be enough. But then on August 14th, 2018, everything changed. You'll learn that on that day, the defendant overheard a conversation between Agatha Lee and Miss Lee's granddaughter, a woman named Stevie Rogers. The defendant heard Agatha Lee say that she planned to change her will, that instead of leaving that $20 million to the defendant, she was going to leave it to Stevie Rogers instead. The defendant had to make sure that never happened. So she came up with a plan. You'll learn that immediately after hearing that conversation, the defendant took a trip to the pharmacy. She purchased an over-the-counter drug called chlorandramine, a drug she knew Miss Lee was fatally allergic to. When she got home, she swapped one of Miss Lee's regular medicines for a dose of that lethal drug. Members of the jury, the defendant poisoned Agatha Lee to make sure Miss Lee never got the chance to change her will, to make sure she got that $20 million. That's why we're here today. Stevie Rogers has sued the defendant under the Slayer statute. Now, what that statute says is that if someone kills another person, they can't inherit that person's money. Now, this means that we must prove by a preponderance of the evidence, which just means it's more likely than it is not, that the defendant knowingly or purposefully caused Agatha Lee's death. When we meet this burden, the defendant won't have access to that $20 million. That money will go to Stevie Rogers instead, just like Miss Lee wanted. And you'll actually get a chance to meet Miss Rogers today. When you do, she's going to tell you all about how much she loved her grandmother. She'll tell you how on the day her grandmother died, she caught the defendant eavesdropping on a conversation about Agatha Lee's will. She'll tell you how later that night she saw the defendant sneaking into her grandmother's bedroom, hiding something in her hand. You'll also hear from a man named Marco Bond, a private investigator who looked into Agatha Lee's death. Mr. Bond will tell you today how when confronted with the facts of this case, the defendant lied. How all of the physical and the forensic evidence points to the defendant killing Agatha Lee. And at the end of today's trial, you'll know exactly why the defendant chose to do that. Because even though Agatha Lee put her through school, put a roof over her head, fed her, paid her, for the defendant, that was never enough. You learn the defendant wanted more. So she took Agatha Lee's life too. That's why at the end of today's trial, we're going to ask you to find the defendant liable. Thank you.
Thank you, counsel. Do we have an opening statement from the defense?
Yes, Your Honor. Just a moment to take the chair out of the room.
Of course.
They saw what the plaintiff wanted them to see. Normally, we'd be in a courtroom right now with wooden furniture. There would be 6 of you sitting in chairs, and I'd physically be right in front of you, standing just a few feet away. But that's not the case today. Today, we're having trial by video conference, and that actually gives me the unique ability to control what you see in a new way. Mr. Greenwell, can I get the first exhibit, please? This is a picture of Agatha Lee. Today, you'll learn, and we agree as the defense, that she passed away on August 14th, 2018. We agree that she passed away in her home, by herself, in her bedroom. And members of the jury, we agree that the reason she was killed is because she ingested 2 pills of chloroandramine, which she was fatally allergic to. And that someone put the pills in her pill organizer. But members of the jury, we don't agree on who did it. You see, today, you'll learn that the moment the police were called, one person said that it was Drew Mars. One person said that it was murder. One person said there needed to be a toxicology screen done. One person said that they needed to take pictures of Miss Agatha Lee's pill organizer. That they needed to search Miss Mars's bedroom. That person was Stevie Rogers. Because from the moment this investigation began, she made them see what she wanted them to see. Now, in today's case, the plaintiff have brought a suit against my client under the Slayer statute. And what that means, members of the jury, is that it's your job to determine whether it's more likely or not that my client, Miss Drew Mars, actually killed Agatha Lee with intention and purpose. Members of the jury, that would mean that because she was the sole beneficiary of Agatha Lee's will, she'd be left with nothing. Today, you're going to learn that the plaintiff, Miss Rogers, actually knew that. The plaintiff in today's case, they have a burden. They have to prove that to you by preponderance of the evidence. Members of the jury, what that means is that it's their responsibility and their responsibility alone to make sure that they've convinced you of their case, that they've brought you evidence. But we as the defense, we don't have a burden. We don't have to show you a single piece of evidence. We don't have to call a single witness, but we will to tell you what really happened. Because you see, on July 4th, 2018, you'll learn that Stevie Rogers, Miss Agatha Lee's granddaughter, shows up out of the blue. That she had abandoned her grandmother for over 10 years. And that when she shows up, her $2 million trust fund had completely run dry. You'll hear from Miss Mars today, who will tell you that in all that time that she abandoned her grandmother, Stevie Rogers not once made a phone call, wrote a letter, or sent an email. And in that absence, Miss Mars will tell you that she was there for Miss Lee, that she was the one who took care of her for 10 years, that she was the one who became family. You're also going to hear from someone named Ryan Cabrera, who will tell you that she knew about this relationship between Miss Lee and her caretaker, that they were close, they were like family. And she'll tell you that Miss Lee actually says on August 14th, 2018, I had to tell Stevie something this morning. I had to tell Stevie no. I hope she'll forgive me. And members of the jury, that quote is important because you'll learn that the conversation that Stevie Rogers had with Agatha Lee that morning, well, she's representing it in a totally different way. And that's why, members of the jury, at the end of today's trial, it'll be clear that the plaintiff will be trying to make you see only what they want you to see. But members of the jury, the evidence will show something completely different. So when Mr. Norman Greenwell comes up here and goes over the facts, he's going to ask you to find the only just verdict, the only verdict that the law and the evidence will support. He's going to ask you to find Miss Mars not liable. Thank you.
Thank you, counsel. So we're now going to proceed with the plaintiff's case in chief. Before the plaintiff calls its first witness, I'll ask all the jurors to switch to gallery view. That button is in the upper right corner of your screen, and this will allow you to see both the attorneys and the witnesses at the same time. And now, having said that, plaintiff, feel free to call your first witness. Yeah, you're muted. I'm sorry.
Sorry, muted. At this time, the plaintiff calls Ms. Stevie Rogers to the stand. May I proceed?
Now I'm muted. You may proceed.
Could you please introduce yourself to the members of the jury? Ms. Rogers, I think you're muted. Ms. Rogers?
Hello, can you hear me?
We got her now.
Yes.
Hopefully, and if any of the jurors can't hear the witness, please message myself and or the bailiff, and I will communicate that to the but for now, at least I can hear the witness when I couldn't before.
Okay, great. My apologies.
That's all right. We expect things like this to happen.
Could you please introduce yourself to the members of the jury?
Yes, hi. My name is Stevie Rogers.
Why are you here today?
I'm here because my grandmother, Agatha Lee, passed away on August 14th of 2018. And I believe that her caretaker, Drew Mars, was the person that killed her.
Ms. Rogers, we're going to talk about your grandmother's death, but I want the members of the jury to get to know her a little bit. Could you tell them a little bit about her?
Sure. My grandma was an author. She wrote the mystery book, Death in a Bottle. It's a really popular book. You might have heard of it, but my grandma would never mention it herself. She was really one of the most humble people that I've ever known.
What was your relationship with your grandmother like?
We were really close. When my parents both passed away in 2008, we were the only family that was left, and we really bonded because of that.
How did the two of you handle your parents' death?
During that time, my grandma and I spent almost every single day together. I just remember she was so strong. I mean, she had just lost her daughter, but she was always there for me.
Did the two of you stay close?
We tried, but after a few years, I decided that I should take my opportunity and travel. My parents had always encouraged me to travel when I had the chance. So after college, I decided to go overseas and I started writing 2 tourism books focused on solo traveling. But being overseas also meant that I wasn't able to talk to my grandma as much as I would have liked.
How often did the two of you talk to each other?
Well, we talked on the phone on big days like birthdays, and my grandma sent me letters sometimes, but the last letter I got from her was in February of 2018, and I learned that I was being disinherited from her will.
Would you recognize that will if I showed it to you?
Yeah,
Mr. Bestman, could we get Exhibit 9 on the screen, please? Is this that will you just mentioned?
yeah, it is.
Does it appear to be a fair and accurate copy of that will?
Yep,
Has it been changed since the last time you saw it?
no.
The plaintiff offers Exhibit 9.
No objection, Your Honor.
All right, it will be so admitted.
Now, Ms. Rogers, what did you learn when you read this will?
That Drew Mars, my grandma's caretaker, would be getting everything after my grandma passed away.
Does this will mention your name specifically?
Yeah, it does.
What does it say?
The last line, it says, I specifically intend to exclude my grandchild, Stevie Rogers, from receiving any benefit from my estate or under this will.
Thank you, Mr. Bestman. Now, Ms. Rogers, how did you react to finding out that you had been disinherited?
Well, I was surprised, but I really wasn't worried about the money aspect of it. I had plans to publish both of my books when I got back to the US. Really, what I learned from this letter was that I definitely wasn't spending as much time with my grandma as I should have been, and I felt really bad about that.
So did you come back to the United States?
Yeah, I came back a few months later in June of 2018. The next month, July, was the 10th anniversary of my parents' death, and I really just thought that I should be there with my grandma for that.
So when did you go see your grandma?
On the 4th of July in 2018, I went to Lee Manor, which is where she lived.
How long did you stay?
A few weeks. I was actually there up until she passed away.
Ms. Rogers, in those few weeks, what was your relationship with your grandmother like?
It was wonderful. It was just like old times, really. We made breakfast in the morning. We played backgammon together, went for lots of walks. We had a great time together.
Was there anyone else living at your grandmother's house at the time?
Yeah, Drew Mars was living there.
Now, you mentioned before that Drew Mars was your grandmother's caretaker. What sorts of things would you see her do for your grandmother?
Well, when I was home, I was usually the one that took most of the care of my grandma, but I guess I did see Drew do some things like refill my grandma's pill organizer and take her temperature, things like that.
And what was your relationship with Drew Mars like?
It was fine at first. We were both about the same age, and I thought that we'd be able to get along, but then she just started acting really weird.
What do you mean?
Well, it seemed like she was just constantly hovering over us. at the weirdest times too. Like if I wanted to grab my grandma a book or something like that, Drew would step in and say that she wanted to do it instead. Or if I was having a private conversation with my grandma, I could usually look around and find Drew just standing there. It really made me uncomfortable.
Miss Rogers, do you remember the most recent time you saw Drew Mars hovering during one of your conversations?
Yeah, my grandma and I were in her study, and my grandma told me that she had changed her mind and decided to leave her whole estate to me. She gave me a hug and a kiss, and then we walked out of the study, and there was Drew just standing there right next to the door.
Did the defendant say anything?
Well, not at first. She made this really weird big smile at my grandma and said, "I'll get the car." And then when my grandma started to head downstairs, she turned to me and her expression completely changed. I mean, I had never even seen her like that. She looked completely irate, red face, her fists were clenched, and she just glared at me and said, "No way."
Miss Rogers, what day was that?
It was on August 14th, the day my grandmother passed.
After you had that conversation with your grandmother, how'd you spend the rest of the day?
Well, my grandma had gone out to lunch with a friend, but after she got back, we watched a movie together, had a pretty early dinner, and then when she went to bed, I said good night and "I love you." That was actually the last thing that I ever said to her.
Did you see the defendant that night?
Yeah, just a few minutes after I came back downstairs from my grandma's room, I saw Drew walking around upstairs.
What was the defendant doing?
Well, she came out of her bedroom and she was holding her hand up like this, like she was holding something. And then she sort of tiptoed across the upper level and walked right into my grandma's room.
When you saw the defendant walking into your grandmother's bedroom, did you say anything?
No, and looking back, I would do anything to step in and say something, but I mean, Drew was my grandma's caretaker. I trusted her to take care of my grandma at least.
What happened the next morning?
I woke up from pounding on my door. Drew walked in and told me that grandma wasn't waking up. I couldn't believe it. I mean, she had seemed so healthy the weeks before. We had just gone on a walk together the night before. I knew right away that something was off.
So what did you do?
I called an investigator. It was just too much of a coincidence between the way Drew had been acting and then seeing her.
Objection, Your Honor. May I be heard?
Yes, you may.
Your Honor, under Rule 403, this is more prejudicial than probative, specifically using the terminology that I think I might be misremembering the witness's answer, but that actually, Your Honor, withdrawn.
All right.
Miss Rogers, you were explaining why you called that private investigator. Were you finished?
Well, I called him because it just seemed like too much of a coincidence between the way that Drew had been acting and then seeing her in the hallway after that conversation about the will I had with my grandma, and then seeing her walk into my grandma's room that night. So I told them that they needed to do an autopsy.
Do you know if they ever did that autopsy?
Yeah, they did.
Would you recognize the results of them?
Yeah.
Mr. Bressman, could I get Exhibit 2 on the screen, please? Ms. Rogers, what does this autopsy say about the cause of your grandmother's death?
My grandma was poisoned by a drug called chlorandramine.
Before you read this autopsy, had you ever heard of that drug before?
Yeah. Drew Mars had told me that my grandma was allergic to chloramine. I didn't even know that until Drew told me.
Did the defendant say anything else?
Yes, Drew told me that chloramine could kill my grandma.
Thank you, Ms. Rogers. Your Honor, I have nothing further right now.
Thank you, counsel. Cross-examination for this witness.
Yes, Your Honor. Ms. Rogers, can you see and hear me okay?
Yes, thank you.
You know what the Slayer statute is, don't you?
I think so.
You know that if somebody kills the person who they were going to inherit something from, that they don't get anything, correct?
Yeah,
And you know that Drew Mars was written in your grandmother's most recent will.
yes,
So you know that if she was found liable for your grandmother's murder, everything would go to you.
Objection, Your Honor. This calls for a legal conclusion.
May I be heard, Your Honor?
Yes, but I'll hear, actually, could you explain your objection further and then I'll hear from you?
Yes, Your Honor. Now, what the opposing counsel just asked the witness is that she knows for a fact that the money will go to her if she wins this case today. Now, opposing counsel can ask about the witness's perceptions, what she believes, but the question as he just phrased it calls for a legal conclusion that this witness is unable to make.
Is there a specific rule of evidence that you're objecting under?
Yes, Your Honor, this is an improper opinion.
Okay. All right, your response?
Your Honor, the question itself was properly phrased to elicit a fact that is proper for this witness to testify as a lay witness under 701. This witness knows that if Drew Mars were to be found liable for the Slayer statute, that all of Miss Agatha Lee's assets would go to her next of kin. This is knowledge that she has. It's not a legal conclusion.
I'm going to overrule the objection. I think what's important is what the witness's perception is, and I don't believe that it calls for her to make a legal conclusion. So I'll allow the question.
Yes, Your Honor.
Miss Rogers, you know that if Miss Mars, my client, is found liable for the death of your grandmother, that all of your grandmother's assets would go to you.
I think so. I don't know how or when, but yeah, I think that's right.
You know that your grandmother has over $20 million in assets, correct?
Yeah.
I want to talk to you a little bit about your background. You've never had to work a day in your life, have you?
No.
In fact, like you said on direct, the extent of your job history is that you learned to play some music and you started 2 novels, correct?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on what you mean by work. I've never worked a traditional job, but yeah, I've been writing 2 novels for the past couple of years.
And you've never finished those novels, correct?
No, I've never published them.
That's because in 2008, your parents, they actually left you a trust fund, right?
After they passed away, yeah, the trust fund went to me.
And that trust fund that you inherited was worth $2 million.
That's right.
As her last surviving family member, you were named the sole heir to your grandmother's estate that same year, 2008, correct?
Yes.
That was before that will was changed to belong to my client, Miss Mars, correct?
Right.
Now, those $2 million, you actually blew through it pretty quickly, correct?
I don't know. It was about 10 years.
That's a rate of $200,000 a year that you lost.
I mean, I spent the money. That's right. I used most of it to travel and then bought some assets as well.
So that's a yes. That's $200,000 a year rate of money that you lost.
That's right. I spent it.
And between 2011 and 2018, your grandmother would write you letters and call you, right?
Yes.
You wouldn't answer.
We talked on the phone sometimes. I preferred to talk on the phone.
You actually never called her, correct?
No, she was always the one that called me.
You would actually go years without speaking to her.
I think maybe a year or two, but we talked on the phone.
So that's a yes, you would go years without speaking to her.
Sure.
That's a yes?
Yeah.
And in February of 2018, she wrote a letter that changed things, correct?
What do you mean?
Well, you said she wrote you a letter one last time, isn't that right?
Oh, are you talking about the one where I learned that Drew Mars became the heir?
Correct. She wrote you a letter one last time, correct?
Yeah.
That was in February of 2018.
Yes.
And in that letter, she disinherited you.
Yes.
All the money that was going to be yours where she'd have passed was now designated to Drew Mars.
That's right.
Now, after you got that letter, just a few months later, you decided to visit your grandmother, correct?
Yeah, it was about 5 months later, I think.
Well, actually, let's backtrack 1 month. 4 months later, in June, you looked for your grandmother, correct?
What do you mean?
In June of 2018, you went looking for your grandmother, correct?
Oh, yeah, that's right. I was wondering where she lived.
That's because she moved and you had no idea.
Right. I had been overseas for the past several years.
And June 2018 is the exact month that your trust fund ran out.
That's right.
You then hired an investigator to find her.
Yeah, of course. I didn't know where my grandma lived. I wanted to find her.
So it wasn't until July 2018 that you actually visited her.
Yeah, I came to her house on the 4th of July.
I want to talk about what happened when you got there. There were two people living there at the time, correct?
Yep, my grandma and Drew Mars.
And Drew Mars was her caretaker of over 10 years.
Yes.
Let's go over some crucial information. Now, you told us on direct examination that Drew Mars knew that your grandmother was deathly allergic to a medication called chlorandramine, right?
Yes.
And that she knew one pill could kill her.
Yes.
And that Drew Mars knew it was available over the counter.
Yeah.
You actually told us about that from a conversation you had with her the first week of August, correct?
That's true.
Now, on that first week of August, you found out that your grandmother was deathly allergic to chlorandramine.
Yeah.
You found out that one pill could kill her.
Yeah.
And you knew that chlorandramine was available over the counter, correct?
Yeah, after Drew told me.
And on August 14th, the day your grandmother passed away, you'll admit that you were home alone for parts of the day, correct?
Yeah.
You had access to Miss Lee's bedroom.
I mean, I guess I was in the house, but I didn't go in there.
You had access to Miss Mars's bedroom.
Yeah, again, I was in the house, but I didn't go in either of those rooms.
All right, now I want to talk about the investigation in this case. Mr. Greenwell, can you please display Exhibit 6? One moment, Your Honor. Just getting coordinated here. Miss Mars, you recognize what I'm showing you, correct?
Yeah.
This is the investigation report that Detective Noor Khan wrote.
That's right.
It's a fair and accurate copy.
I think so.
It doesn't look changed or altered to you.
No.
Now, according to this report, Detective Khan arrives at your grandmother's house at 9:30 in the morning on August 15th, correct?
Yep.
You were already outside when she got there.
Yeah.
When she got there, you demanded they arrest Drew Mars.
Yes.
You insisted that Drew Mars committed murder.
Yes.
You insisted that they take pictures of your grandmother's pill organizer.
Yes. I wanted to take pictures of as many things as possible.
You insisted that they run a toxicology screen.
Of course. Yes.
And you insisted that they specifically search Drew Mars's bedroom.
Yes.
I want to make something clear. When the detectives found the body, there was no signs of a struggle.
No.
She didn't have a gunshot wound.
No.
She didn't have markings on her neck.
No, she was poisoned.
That's right. And you knew this.
I thought she was, yes.
I have no further questions, Your Honor.
Thank you, counsel. Is there any redirect for this witness before she's allowed to be excused?
No redirect examination, Your Honor.
In that case, thank you, Ms. Rogers. You are excused with the thanks of the court. And just a moment before the plaintiff calls its next witness. All right, whenever you're ready.
Thank you, Your Honor. The plaintiff calls Marco Bond to the stand. Sir, could you please introduce yourself to the members of the jury?
Good afternoon. I'm Private Investigator Marco Marzello Bond, badge number 1.
How'd you become a private investigator?
Well, the story's not glamorous. I had suspicions my second wife was seeing another man. My rather expeditious discovery that she was cheating on me with the garbage guy helped me realize my investigative talents. I decided to quit my job at Goldman Sachs and start my own PI firm.
How long have you been working as a private investigator?
I got my license around 10 years ago and have since conducted investigation for the likes of Lady Gaga, Google, Bill de Blasio, and actually, Mr. Bestman, even your great uncle, Alan.
Okay, well, how'd you get involved in this case?
I was telephonically apprised of a concern from a client, Stevie Rogers, on August 15th, 2018. She said something was afoot at the home of her grandmother, Agatha Lee.
Who's Agatha Lee?
Lee is the one nut in my career I had a little trouble cracking. You see, she wrote an acclaimed mystery novel in the year 1968, then burrowed away in her nearly impenetrable countryside estate.
So what'd you do after you got the call from Stevie Rogers?
I arrived on the scene to find Miss Lee deceased.
Who else was there?
Stevie Rogers and in-home caretaker Drew Mars. Shortly thereafter, we were also blessed with the presence of Detective Khan.
What was everybody up to?
There was much bickering about how to handle the body. I was running through body preservation protocols, but Drew Mars kept interrupting me, saying that we had to cremate Miss Lee.
How did you react to that?
I took a moment to tame my overwhelming sleuth suspicions. Then I began to take a look into Drew Mars.
Did you find anything?
Yes, she hand-delivered me lightning in a bottle. Mars told me that she knew Agatha Lee had a fatal allergy to chloroandramine.
How did you respond?
I inquired whether Mars would be so gracious as to let me search her room.
What did the defendant say?
She said, "No way, Jose." She was not going to let me into that room. Then when the police asked, she told him she was not going to be letting anyone in.
So when was the next time you saw the defendant?
On the most notable day of high professional drama in my entire career. That was the reading of Miss Agatha Lee's will on August 20th, 2018.
What happened?
Well, Miss Lee's lawyer seized the stage and proclaimed that Agatha Lee had left her entire estate to Drew Mars.
How did the defendant react?
She looked like my dog after I confront her about a mysterious puddle on the carpet. Mars told everybody she didn't know she would get everything if Agatha died. She kept saying she couldn't believe it. She had no idea.
Now, sir, do you know whether that was true?
Well, I had hacked into Mars' personal computer and saw a contradictory email that Mars had sent around 6 months before Miss Lee had perished.
Would you recognize a picture of that email if I showed it to you in court today?
I would.
Ms. Driscoll, could we get Exhibit 13, please? So what have I just put up on the screen?
This is that email to which I was referring.
Has it been changed or altered in any way?
No, not that I can see.
Now, who took that picture?
I took that picture.
The plaintiff offers Exhibit 13, Your Honor.
Any objection from the defense?
No objections at this time, Your Honor.
All right, it will be admitted.
So what does the defendant's email say?
Agatha just told me she changed her will to leave everything to me. At first, I was in shock. I thought Agatha was just messing with me. But Agatha showed me a will that is dated today, saying Stevie, the no-good grandkid, is out, and I get everything. The house, money, everything. We're talking millions of dollars. This is going to totally change my life.
When did the defendant send that email?
February 1st, 2018.
So what happened next at the will reading?
Well, Detective Khan finally submitted to my investigative instincts and initiated an autopsy of Miss Lee's body.
What did that autopsy conclude?
That Agatha Lee had died of an allergic reaction to chloroandramine.
What happened next?
After that bombshell, the cops were finally able to get a warrant to search Drew Mars' room.
Did you go with them on that search?
Of course, if you want things done the right way, you watch other people do it yourself.
So what did you find?
Most notably, a mysterious black bag that was in the back of Drew Mars' closet.
What did the police do with that bag?
Police diligently dusted this bag for any and all fingerprints.
Are you familiar with the pre-admitted police report?
Religiously.
Ms. Driscoll, could we get Exhibit 6, please? So what did the police conclude about prints on that bag?
Buckle up, Mr. Bestman. On the zipper of this bag, there was a 16-point match for Drew Mars' right thumb.
Did you ever learn what was inside that bag?
Contained therein was a certain bottle of pills.
What did the police do with those pills?
Police consigned these pills to the forensics laboratory for thorough testing.
Are you familiar with the pre-admitted forensic analysis?
Yes, this is the chemical analysis of the pills found in that black bag.
Ms. Driscoll, could we get Exhibit 3, please? So, sir, what were those pills found in the bag inside the defendant's closet?
None other than chloroandramine.
Thank you, sir. Nothing further, Your Honor.
Thank you, counsel. Cross-examination.
Yes, Your Honor. May I proceed?
Yes, you may.
Good afternoon, Mr. Bond. Can you see and hear me okay?
Yes, I can. You look great, counselor. Don't worry.
Nana was murdered. That's what Stevie Rogers told you, right?
Ah, yes. Stevie Rogers was hasty in her conclusions. That's why it was imperative I take a deep and impartial look into this case.
She told you this in a phone call, right?
Correct.
On August 15th of 2018.
Yes, the morning that Miss Agatha Lee had perished.
Right, it was at 8:45 that morning.
That's right.
And she didn't say Nana passed away in her sleep, did she?
No, Miss Rogers suspected her grandmother was murdered. At this point, I did not suspect foul play myself.
She didn't say, I think there's something wrong with Nana, did she?
No, her grandmother was already dead.
She specifically said that Nana was murdered, right?
Objection, Your Honor. Asked and answered.
Your Honor, if I may.
You don't need to. You can ask a clarifying question, and then we'll move on.
Mr. Bond, she specifically said that Nana was murdered, right?
That's right, Counselor.
So you decided to go and investigate.
Yes, nothing gets me juiced like a search for truth.
So when you arrived at Lee Manor at 9:25 that morning, right?
I did.
And when you got there, you went to go examine the body.
Yes, like I said, my initial thought was the death appeared to be of natural causes. Thankfully, I was always adapting in light of new facts.
But directing you back to the question, Mr. Bond, when you arrived on the scene, you went to go examine the body, right?
Yes, I did.
Now, to be clear, you actually arrived on the scene before any law enforcement did, right?
Yes, my own standards of excellence surpass any local law enforcement, I think.
Now, when you went to go examine the body, you didn't find any blood?
Correct.
You didn't find any signs of a struggle?
Yes, like I said, my first glance suspected natural causes. That's why it's imperative to maintain an open mind.
Now, you initially suspected natural causes, but that's not what you told us in court today, is it?
Yes, sir. Like I said, my conclusion adapted in accordance with the new evidence.
Now, you keep talking about your credentials as a private investigator, but you're not a police officer, are you?
No, sir. There is no machine in which I am a cog.
You've never been a police officer, then?
No.
You've never had any police training?
Not from any municipal police department. I have extensive international investigative training.
You've never had any criminal justice education?
That's not true. I trained exhaustively preceding my licensure and have continued to do so in the face of advancements in the field of investigation.
But you've never had any specific training as a police officer, right?
Yes, sir. Like I said, I've never been a police officer.
Yet you were still paid $10,000 to find Miss Lee back in June of 2018, right?
That's right, sir.
You were paid by Stevie Rogers.
Correct.
And to be clear, that's the same Stevie Rogers that's on call with us today.
Yes, sir.
And that same person is paying you $25,000 for your investigation.
That's right.
Now let's talk about what $25,000 actually bought Miss Rogers. You spoke to Miss Mars on the 15th, right?
Yes.
It was through speaking with Miss Mars that you learned that she was Miss Lee's caretaker.
That's correct.
You also learned through this conversation that Miss Lee had a very severe allergy to something called chloroandramine, right?
Yes, Miss Mars told me she was keenly aware of that allergy.
You asked to search Miss Mars's room, didn't you?
Right.
And she said no.
That's correct.
But you did it anyway.
That's not quite right, Counselor. Once the police obtained a search warrant for Mars' room, Detective Khan actually asked that I tag along.
But on August 15th, you actually searched her room too, didn't you?
That's not right, sir. I only searched the room after a search warrant was acquired.
Is it your testimony today that you did not search Miss Mars's room on the 15th?
I only searched Miss Mars' room after that search warrant was acquired.
But is it your testimony today that you did not search Miss Mars's room on the 14th?
On the 14th? I was not
Or
on the scene on the 14th.
The 15th, excuse me, sir.
That's correct. The extensive search into Drew Mars' room where that black bag was found was only conducted after the search warrant was acquired.
You prepared a statement for a court today, correct?
That's right.
That was a speech that you made on the, I believe, the 20th?
That's right.
You prepared this. You had up until 24 hours to change or amend this statement should you deem it necessary.
Yes, sir.
But you elected not to.
That's correct.
Mr. Pais LeMay, if you could please throw the witness's affidavit onto the screen for me, if you could go to slide 16, if you don't mind.
Yeah, give me 1 second. It's coming up.
Thank you, Mr. Pais LeMay. Thank you, Mr. Pais LeMay. You recognize this portion of your speech, right?
Yes.
Please read along silently lines 114 to line 115 as I read them aloud. I asked Mars if I might look around Mars's room. Mars said no. I read that correctly?
That's correct, sir. As I said, once Mars said no, we waited for a search warrant.
Mr. Pais LeMay, if you could, please move forward to lines 191, starting at 191, if you don't mind. Might be up a little higher, but that's okay. Please read along silently, Mr. Bond, lines 190, starting at line 191 as I read aloud. Recall that on August 14th, while Detective Khan was speaking with Mars, I decided to stretch my legs. I just didn't say where. You see, that morning, I decided to peek into Mars's bedroom. Now, Mr. Bond, you don't say in there that you get a warrant, do you?
Sir, were you talking about the ascertainment of the chloroandramine pills in the closet or the email?
No, sir. I'm saying that when you fulfilled your search on the 14th, did you have a warrant that day or no?
Oh no, not the door was open that day, sir.
So you didn't have permission to search a room.
Yes, correct. The search that yielded the results of the chloroandramine pills in the closet only came after the police got their warrant.
Now, I'm not asking about the chloroandramine, Mr. Bond. I'm asking about your search on the 14th. You didn't have a warrant when you searched a room on the 14th, did you?
Yes, sir. That's correct.
You went into a room.
Right. Specifically to take the picture of the email. But like I said, the other evidence was collected, confiscated afterward.
No. Once again, Mr. Bond, I'm not asking about all the other evidence you collected. I'm asking you specifically about your interactions on the 14th. When you went to Miss Mars's room, you opened up her computer.
Right.
In your own words, you hacked her email.
Yes.
You took a picture of her email.
That's right. That's where we got the contradictory evidence that Mars had known about the will, where Agatha Lee left everything to her.
And you didn't tell anybody about that picture when you took it, did you?
That's right. While MSPD wanted my assistance, I didn't need theirs for my investigation.
So you didn't tell Detective Nora Khan, the lead investigator, did you?
That's correct.
You didn't tell anyone else from the Midland State Police Department?
That's right, sir. Like I said, I was happy to assist them, but I didn't need help with my investigation.
You didn't tell Stevie Rogers, the person who paid you for this investigation, about it, did you? When you took it?
No, of course, sir. I'm an impartial investigator. Rogers was not privy to my process.
And you certainly didn't tell Drew Mars, the person whose email you searched, about this email when you took it.
Of course not. That's right.
So let's talk about what this all means for the jury, what your investigation means for the jury. Miss Mars had access to the pill organizer where the chloroandramine, or the pill organizer that allegedly contained chloroandramine, right?
No, sir. The pill organizer only contained Lee's arthritis medication. The chloroandramine was found in Drew Mars' bag after that search warrant was received and then the investigation conducted.
Well, Mr. Bond, you are aware that Miss Mars had access to that pill organizer, right?
Yes, sir. It just did not have chloroandramine pills in it.
But so did Miss Rogers, right?
To my knowledge, those pills were only organized by Drew Mars.
But that's not what I asked you, Mr. Bond. What I asked you was whether Miss Rogers did or did not have access to that pill organizer. And she did, didn't she?
Yes, I suppose anyone could potentially find that organizer.
Miss Mars knew that Miss Lee was allergic to chlororandramine, right?
That's correct.
Objection, Your Honor. Speculation.
Your Honor, may I respond?
You may.
Mr. Bond learned about this fact through speaking with Miss Mars. Therefore, it's not speculation. It's based on his rationally based perception.
Why don't you rephrase the question to focus on the source of the witness's knowledge? So in that form, the objection will be sustained.
Yes, Your Honor.
We'll explore that topic.
Mr. Bond, you learned through your conversation with Miss Mars that she knew that she was allergic to chlororandramine, right?
Yes, sir.
But you also learned through that conversation that Miss Rogers also knew that, didn't you?
Yes.
Thank you for your time, Mr. Bond. Nothing further at this time, Your Honor.
Is there any redirect for this witness?
No redirect, Your Honor. May the witness be excused?
In that case, Mr. Bond, you will be excused with the thanks to the court. And my understanding is there are no further witnesses for the plaintiff.
That's correct, Your Honor. The plaintiff rests.
All right. In that case, by rule, we are going to take a 5-minute recess, come back at 3:58, we'll say. And then please remember that this video is being publicly broadcast on YouTube live stream. So, probably keep yourself muted. And thank you, and we will see you all shortly. All right. Hopefully everybody's back and ready to go. So defense, can you confirm that you guys are back?
Judge, they're still in the breakout rooms. I'm supposed to next confirm that all of our judges are back first.
Okay, I'm sorry. I'll turn it over to you. My
No,
apologies.
you're good. You're good.
right.
Judges, could you either briefly turn on your video or send me a message? I just need to confirm that you're all back. Okay, I'm just gonna mark that. There's 7. Okay, 7 of you. You're all back. Great. You can turn off your screens, and I'll let the competitors back in.
All right. So I just want to confirm that everybody is back and ready to go who is supposed to be back from who we need. So attorneys from the defense, are you and your witnesses both present? Just one party representative can answer, but whoever's going to call the first witness.
Your Honor, Mr. Pazime is going to be directing the first witness. He and his witness are both here.
All right. In that case, defense, please call your first witness.
Yes, Your Honor. The defense calls Ms. Drew Mars to the stand.
And I will just remind all our jurors to keep your view in gallery view so that you can see both the witnesses and the attorney. That's more of a reminder for myself because I had messed that up, but you can proceed when you're ready.
Yes, Your Honor. Please, before we begin, Ms. Mars, can you see and hear me okay?
Yes, I can.
Please, introduce yourself.
Hi, my name is Drew Mars.
We've heard a lot about you from others today. Would you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. I was born in Cuba, and my siblings and I moved to this country when I was just 5 years old. My parents helped us escape Cuba for a better life. We moved to Alabama, and then I moved right after I got my bachelor's in nursing.
And where do you live now?
Right here in Midlands. I'm currently living at Lee Manor, Agatha Lee's house. She's who I lived with until she passed.
Now, Mr. Greenwell, can I please get Exhibit 1 on the screen? One second. Ms. Mars, can you see Exhibit 1?
I can. That's Agatha Lee.
And who was she to you?
Technically, she was my boss and also my patient, but she was so much more than that to me. She was a friend for 10 years, a grandmother, a role model, and really she was family.
And how long did you live with her?
Just about 10 years. I started working as her primary caretaker back in 2009.
What were some of your responsibilities?
Well, mainly I was responsible for preparing her medication for the coming week every Saturday. But really, I did whatever she needed me to. Housekeeping, cooking, driving, you name it.
How would you two spend your free time together?
We talked a lot, watched movies. Her favorite was Clue. We played games together, read together. We just enjoyed each other's company.
Now, I want to talk about the person who's suing you today, the plaintiff, Stevie Rogers. How do you know her?
She was Agatha's granddaughter. She wasn't really around during the time that I worked for Agatha, but she's just about my age.
What do you mean she wasn't really around?
Well, for the 10 years I worked for Agatha, Stevie almost never came to visit. I really hadn't seen her since before 2011. And as far as I know, Stevie hadn't called since at least 2009. I never really saw any emails or letters from Stevie.
During those 10 years you mentioned the plaintiff was absent. Did you ever see Miss Lee attempting to reach out to her?
Yes, all the time. She wrote her letters, left voicemails, sent emails. My heart broke for her. It was horrible watching Stevie put her through that. Got to the point where she just decided she would send Stevie a letter one last time.
Would you recognize that letter if I showed it to you?
I would.
Ms. Mars, can you see the letter I just pulled up?
Yes.
Is it a fair and accurate copy of the letter you mentioned?
Looks like it, yes.
Has it been changed or altered in any way?
No.
Defense moves into evidence Exhibit 10, Your Honor.
Is there any objection?
Yes, Your Honor, to hearsay.
Would you like to be heard?
Yes, Your Honor. Now, the statements in this document talk about the relationship between Stevie Rogers and Agatha Lee. The statements contained within this document are being used for the truth of the matter asserted. They're hearsay under Rule 801 and inadmissible under Rule 802.
May I be heard?
Yes, please.
Your Honor, while we agree that these statements are hearsay, we believe that they fall under the exception 8033, then existing mental, physical, and emotional condition, Your Honor. Specifically, the paragraph we're interested in is the fourth paragraph, where Miss Lee specifically talks about why she's taking Stevie out of her will, why she's adding Drew Mars into her will, and how she feels about Stevie. All those statements particularly go to her then existing mental state as her plan, intent, or feeling.
All right, two questions for the plaintiff.
Yes,
First,
Your Honor.
First, do you agree that those statements in the fourth paragraph fall under 8033?
Your Honor, I believe the first sentence in that paragraph falls under 8033 and the last sentence, but the sentence in between absolutely does not fall under Rule 8033.
Okay, and so
May I be heard, Your Honor?
Just let me finish with her, and then I'll get back to you. So are you okay then with redacting and admitting if redacting the other statements in the document and admitting those statements that you acknowledge fall under the exception?
Yes, Your Honor. That first sentence and that last sentence of the fourth paragraph were allowed with being admitted into evidence so long as the rest of it is redacted.
All right, now going back to the defense. So with that position, do you have an argument for why the other statements in the letter should be admitted, or are you fine with that compromise?
Your Honor, we actually believe that the sentence, Drew has been with me for more than a decade, stayed with me through thick and thin, and turned down several offers that would have paid Drew far more money than I do. That sentence specifically goes to facts remembered that pertain to the validity in terms of a will, which Your Honor knows that facts remembered are an exception to hearsay under 8033 when they specifically relate to the terms and validity of a will, which is why we believe that this.
Sorry, I don't have 8033 in front of me, but I don't recall it. Facts remembered are an exception to hearsay?
Your Honor, that facts remembered in statements of belief specifically are not covered under 8033 unless it is going towards and relates to the terms and validity of the will. It's that very last sentence in 8033 that says that facts remembered, statements of belief or memory that go to facts remembered don't fall under the purview of 8033 unless they are talking and relate to specifically the terms and validity of a will. And since those are the reasons that Miss Agatha Lee gave for writing Stevie out of the will, that goes to the invalidity of the first will and the terms of her new will, those statements fall under the exception 8033.
All right. I think there's a lot we could say about this, but I'm going to, in the interest of time, I'm going to allow one last response if you would like it from the plaintiff on that.
Yes, Your Honor. On the basis of opposing counsel's argument as it pertains to the will statement of 8033, now that rule specifically says it has to pertain to the validity of that will. These statements don't pertain to whether or not a will was valid. It pertains to other reasonings, other facts. Therefore, this does not fall under that rule.
All right. I think that this is a close question, but I am going to redact those statements explaining the reasons for the change in the will, and only admit into evidence the statements that both parties have agreed fall under 8033. But the rest,
yes, Your Honor.
Those portions of the document will be admitted as exhibit.
And Your Honor, just to clarify, the part at the top where it says Stevie and the dates and the signature, just to hash out with opposing counsel, those are still included in the document too, constructively.
I think I would include those documents. I think that's there's no dispute as to who the speaker is, and that seems to be relevant context to the statement. So I think we'll include the date and the who's being addressed and who the speaker is as not being redacted from the document.
Ms. Mars, what did Ms. Lee write in this document that pertained to you?
Well, she said that she was writing Stevie out of her will and that she would be now leaving everything to me.
Did you ever see Miss Agatha Lee try to contact her granddaughter after she wrote this letter?
No, I don't think so, no.
I want to talk to you about the will we were mentioning for a bit. Would you recognize it if I showed it to you?
Yes.
I just lost it. Here we go. Now, this is the will we were talking about, correct?
Yes, looks like it.
Does it look fair and accurate, Ms. Mars?
Yes, looks the same as the last time I saw it.
Do you see any changes or alterations?
No.
Your Honor, I believe that this has already been moved into evidence, but I just want to clarify.
I think that it has.
Ms. Mars, when did you first see this will?
August 20th. It was at the will reading about a week after Agatha passed away. But I had known she had changed it to this since about February.
Now, we've heard some testimony today that you acted surprised when the will was read. If you knew what was in the will, why did you act that way?
I was scared that they would think the worst. Stevie cried murder the second Agatha passed, and I was worried that they'd only see what she wanted them to see.
We've also heard that in the hours leading up to Miss Lee's passing, she and the plaintiff had a conversation in the study. Do you remember that conversation?
I do. I remember I had made Agatha some tea. I came up to her door to give it to her. It's the door of her study, and I overheard them speaking.
What did you hear?
I heard Stevie talk about how she had proven her loyalty and how she wanted to be put back in the will.
How did her grandmother, Miss Lee, respond?
Well, she said that she loved her and that for Stevie's own good, that's why she wasn't going to write her back into the will.
What happened after you heard Miss Rogers and Miss Lee discussing the will?
I drove Agatha to lunch with a friend, ran some errands, and then I picked her right back up.
Did Miss Rogers join you?
No, she stayed home when we left.
While you were out of the house, could anyone access Miss Lee's pill organizer?
Yes, as far as I know, it was in the same place it always was, in Agatha's bedroom, on the nightstand. Agatha didn't ever really leave it under lock and key or anything like that. And I only moved it on Saturdays when it was time to refill it and I didn't touch it again until it was empty the following Saturday.
Now, that afternoon, the 14th, what happened after you picked up Miss Lee?
We went home. I made dinner. Remember, I went to bed around 9:30. The next morning, I went to take Agatha her coffee. She wouldn't wake up.
What did you do?
My nursing training kicked in. I checked for a pulse. I checked if she was breathing. I yelled for Stevie to call 911. Then I started trying CPR. I thought maybe that would work, but she wouldn't wake up. So I ran to Stevie's room. She called 911. Next thing I know, Stevie is accusing me of murder.
Now, Ms. Mars, we've heard some testimony today that a bag containing chloroandramine was found in your closet. Did that bag belong to you?
No, I've never even purchased chloroandramine. The bag wasn't mine, and I know how it looks, and I wish I could explain to you how it ended up there, but I didn't put it there.
Miss Lee, I hate that I'm forced to ask you this. Did you kill Agatha Lee?
No. I've been sitting here listening as they suggest that I poisoned Agatha, but that's so far from the truth. I loved her. She was my family for 10 years. I would never do anything to hurt her.
Thank you, Your Honor. I have no further questions.
All right, thank you, counsel. Is there cross-examination of this witness?
Yes, Your Honor. Yes, Your Honor. Good afternoon, Miss Mars.
Good afternoon.
Now, I want to start by talking about something you mentioned on direct examination, okay? Now, you told us that you were Agatha Lee's sole inheritor, right?
I was.
What you understood this to mean is that if she died, you would get her mansion, right?
I would.
You'd get the rights to her book.
I think so, yeah.
If Agatha Lee died, you believe you'd get her $20 million in cash, right?
Yeah, Agatha didn't really have any family she was in contact with, so it would be me.
Miss Mars, your family needed money, right?
Sure, we come from very small beginnings.
That's right, your family needed help paying for rent, true?
Well, I would send my family as much as I could every month, but sure.
That's right, so that's a yes to my question. Your family needed help paying rent, true?
True.
They needed help with medical bills, right?
Yes.
So like you mentioned, you sent most of your paychecks back home to your family, right?
That's right. Agatha, she paid for my housing. I tried to spend as little as possible so most of it could go to my family.
That's right, you thought Agatha Lee compensated you pretty generously, right?
Yes.
But then your sister got sick, true?
I'm not sure what you mean. Yes, my sister was sick, but my compensation didn't change.
Your sister got sick and your compensation, it couldn't pay for her medical bills, right?
No, they were very expensive.
But you know that if you had $20 million, that would be enough to cover your sister's medical bills, right?
Yes, that would be enough.
You know that if you inherited Agatha Lee's estate, your family would never have to worry about money again. True?
That's right.
And then in July of 2018, Stevie Rogers came to stay with you and Agatha Lee, right?
Yes, I believe it was July 4th of 2018.
Stevie Rogers, that's Agatha Lee's granddaughter, right?
That's right.
And on August 14th, 2018, you heard Stevie Rogers and Agatha Lee having a conversation in Miss Lee's study, that's right?
Yes, like I said, I was taking her some tea, and that's when I overheard them talking.
And you told us on direct examination that in this conversation, Agatha Lee refused to change her will, right?
That's right.
You told us Agatha Lee told Stevie Rogers no, right?
Yes.
Well, that's not true, is it?
Objection, Your Honor. Argumentative.
Sorry, Your Honor.
If I was on mute, I apologize. The objection is overruled.
Yes, Your Honor. You were here when Stevie Rogers testified today, weren't you, Miss Mars?
I was.
You heard Miss Rogers talking about that same exact conversation, right?
She did talk about that.
You heard Miss Rogers say that Agatha Lee
Objection, Your Honor. Needlessly cumulative under Rule 403. May I be heard?
You may be heard.
Your Honor, opposing counsel is now trying to reassert their direct examination of Stevie Rogers through the cross of this witness by simply saying, you heard this witness say this, their testimony was this. They're simply building the record with repetitive evidence that's needlessly cumulative under 403.
Do you have a response?
Yes, Your Honor, this is not needlessly cumulative, if I may proffer.
Yes, please.
I'm about to ask this witness if she heard Miss Rogers testify that Agatha Lee planned to meet with her attorney. And then I'm going to ask this witness if she heard Agatha Lee actually on the phone with her attorney making an appointment for later that week. Now, that's corroborating evidence for Stevie Rogers' version of events, and that is absolutely probative to today's case. And that probative value is certainly not substantially outweighed by needlessly cumulative evidence.
Yeah, I mean, counsel, they're allowed to bring up the same facts on multiple witnesses. It's their time. They're allowed to decide how much emphasis to place on certain information. So I overrule the objection.
Oh, Ms. Mars, as a part of that conversation, you heard Stevie Rogers say on direct examination that Agatha Lee said she planned to meet with her attorney later that week, right?
That's what Stevie said, but that's not what happened.
Well, actually, after that conversation, you drove Miss Lee to a restaurant, right?
I did.
On the way to that restaurant, you saw Agatha Lee on the phone, right?
Yes, I believe she made a phone call.
You heard her talking to someone named Kirby, right?
Objection,
yes.
Your Honor, learned through hearsay. May I be heard? Your Honor, opposing counsel is specifically using these statements that she heard her talking to someone named Kirby to assert that the person they were talking to was Kirby, who they will later go on to say, I assume, that Kirby Doolittle was the person who was present at the will reading. Therefore, they're using this statement to assert its truth value and its inadmissible hearsay.
You have a response?
Yes, Your Honor, we're not actually using these statements for their truth value. Now, it doesn't actually matter whether or not Agatha Lee was talking to her attorney or whether or not she planned to meet with her attorney later that week. What we're using this evidence for is impeachment purposes. We're using this evidence to impeach the testimony of Drew Mars. We'd be willing to offer a limiting instruction to that effect.
Can you just repeat again for the record what the statements are that you're eliciting?
Yes, Your Honor. The question I just asked was, you heard her talking to someone named Kirby. And what I'm about to elicit is, you heard her make an appointment for later that week.
May I be heard, Your Honor?
One final time.
Your Honor, we believe that opposing counsel is using this to assert its truth value because they're asserting that Kirby Doolittle was on the phone and that Kirby Doolittle was Miss Agatha Lee's attorney. That evidence will later be tied into the fact that Kirby Doolittle was the person at the will reading. That's corroborating evidence to prove that this person on the phone was the attorney itself, and not just for impeachment purposes. That would be backdooring and hearsay, Your Honor.
And what's your position on the limiting instruction that opposing counsel offered?
Your Honor, it's the defense's contention that a limiting instruction would simply not be enough. That would go to bias and prejudice the jury, hearing this type of evidence and automatically making that connection. We do believe that it's inadmissible hearsay today.
All right. Well, I'm still learning the record myself here, but for now I'm going to overrule this with a limiting instruction. And if they fail to make a connection later on to the impeachment purposes, then you can feel free to reassert your objection at the end of the examination.
Yes, Your Honor.
So, Ms. Mars, you heard her talking to someone named Kirby, right?
I did.
You knew from your 10 years working with Miss Lee that Kirby Doolittle was the name of her attorney, right?
That's right.
You heard Agatha Lee.
Objection, Your Honor. Opposing counsel is drawing the exact connection that we were talking about earlier. She knew that Kirby was the name of her attorney. She's drawing the connection that the person she was speaking to on the phone was Kirby Doolittle.
What's your objection to the statement that she knew the name of the attorney? What's improper about that?
Your Honor, it's our contention that asserting for the truth of the matter asserted that Kirby Doolittle was her attorney makes it more likely that Drew Mars knew that she was speaking with her actual attorney and not somebody else named Kirby, or not somebody different, perhaps.
I'm going to overrule the objection.
So, Miss Mars, that's a yes. You know Kirby Doolittle was Agatha Lee's attorney?
Yes.
You heard Agatha Lee make a plan to meet with that Kirby for later that week, true?
Yes, I think that's what she said.
Miss Mars, you know that if Agatha Lee changed her will, made Stevie Rogers the sole inheritor, well, you wouldn't get that $20 million anymore, right?
I guess hypothetically, if she did that, yes.
So let's talk about what you did. Now, after you overheard that conversation in the study, you took a trip to the pharmacy, right?
Yes, Agatha told me she needed a few things. She gave me some cash, so I thought I'd get it while she was at lunch.
That's right. When you were at that pharmacy, you paid in cash, right?
That's right.
A week later, a bag full of chlorantramine pills were found in your closet, true?
That's right. And like I said in direct, I don't know how they got there. The bag wasn't mine. I've never purchased that medication.
Miss Mars, I know you're claiming that that bag wasn't yours, but that's a yes to my question. That bag full of chlorantramine was found in your closet, correct?
Yes, it was in my closet.
Let's talk about August 20th, 2018. That was the day of Agatha Lee's will reading, right?
It was.
Her attorney, Kirby Doolittle, stood before everybody, right?
That's right.
He read Agatha Lee's will, right?
Yes, he did.
Kirby Doolittle said that you would be receiving everything, right?
Yes, that's what the will said.
And when you heard that, Miss Mars, you said, I don't believe it, right?
Yes.
You said, I had no idea, right?
That's right. You have to understand, from the moment Agatha died, Stevie pointed the finger at me. I didn't trust her. I didn't trust the private investigator that she hired and paid to be there. They were accusing me of murdering her.
Miss Mars, you said, I had no idea. That's what you said?
I said that.
That was a lie, wasn't it?
It's true. I did know.
Like you told us on direct examination, I wrote it down. You said, I was scared that they would think the worst. That's why you lied, right?
That's right.
You lied because you thought the truth would make you look guilty, right?
That's right.
Thank you, Miss Mars. Your Honor, I have nothing further.
Thank you, counsel. Do you have any redirect for this witness?
Your Honor, not at this time, I believe because of time purposes.
All right. In that case, Ms. Mars, you are excused with the thanks of the court, and let's proceed expeditiously to your next witness defense.
Certainly, Your Honor. At this time, the defense calls Ryan Cabrera to the stand. May I proceed?
You may.
Good afternoon, Ms. Cabrera. Can you see and hear me okay?
I can, yes.
Please introduce yourself to the court, spelling your last name for the record.
Hi, everyone. My name is Ryan Cabrera. That's Cabrera.
What do you do for a living, Ms. Cabrera?
I'm an author. I used to write poetry and short stories, but I've definitely found a lot more success after my biography on Dylan Hendricks after her attempted murder trial went viral in book terms. But ever since then, I've just been trying to write stories that the people of Midlands want to know about.
Ms. Cabrera, do you know someone by the name of Agatha Lee?
I do, yes. She is one of the best mystery writers of our generation. You may know her by her famous and only work, Death in a Bottle.
How do you know Miss Lee?
Well, by some stroke of luck, Miss Lee agreed to let me write her biography for her. So I used to meet with her 2 to 3 times a week to get content.
Now, I want to talk about some of the meetings that you had with Miss Lee. Generally, what did you two talk about during these meetings?
Well, I really wanted to learn more about Agatha's personal life because so much of it was just private. That's why I wanted to write this biography in the first place. So because of that, I really wanted to focus our conversations on her childhood, her daughter, how she carried her personal life, and her relationship with Drew Mars. I just wanted to know everything.
Who is Drew Mars?
She's Agatha's caretaker, chauffeur, chef, pretty much whatever Agatha needed her to be.
And you mentioned you learned about the relationship between Miss Mars and Miss Lee. Now, to you, what was that relationship like?
From what I could see, they were extremely close. Like I said, Drew essentially did everything for Agatha. They lived together for, I want to say, a decade. So, from what I knew, they were almost inseparable. Agatha even told me that she was planning on leaving everything that she owned to Drew when she died. And if that isn't close, I don't know what is.
I want to move forward a little bit to June 15th of 2018. Do you have a meeting with Miss Lee that day?
I did. We met in her study like we usually did.
What happened during this meeting?
Well, for the first time, Agatha opened up to me about her granddaughter, Stevie Rogers.
And how did this conversation go?
Well, as far as my biography went, it was totally fine. But it was also just a sad story. She told me about how when Stevie was younger, they were very, very close. They spent a lot of time together. But when Agatha's
Objection to
daughter...
hearsay, Your Honor.
Would you like to be heard?
Yes, Your Honor. These are statements from Agatha Lee about the relationship that Agatha Lee had with her granddaughter, Stevie Rogers. The defense has made it clear that part of their case is that that relationship was troubled, so these statements are being used for their truth value.
Your Honor, may I respond on those grounds?
Yes, you may.
Mr. Besman's correct. We are using these statements for their truth value. However, these statements are an exception to hearsay under Rule 8033. If I may make an offer of proof.
Please.
Ms. Cabrera is going to testify that further down the line, that was the reason why Miss Lee disinherited, or rather the growing rift in the relationship between Miss Rogers and Miss Lee was one of those foundational pieces for why Miss Rogers was disinherited from the will in the first place. Therefore, under Rule 8033, this goes towards the terms or validity of the will and is an exception to hearsay.
If I may, Your Honor?
Yeah, one last time.
Your Honor, there are 3 issues there. First, we have no foundation to establish that this has any... I'm sorry, Your Honor?
3 is a lot. Maybe one of them?
Sure, Your Honor, the biggest issue is that none of this relates to the validity of a will. And even if it did relate to the validity of the will, 8033 would still require it to be a statement of a then existing mental, emotional, or physical condition, which this isn't.
Your Honor, may I respond on those grounds?
I think this is awfully similar to the argument that your previous, that your teammates had on the previous witness. I don't believe that statements of describing historical facts about a relationship fall under 8033. So I'm going to sustain the objection.
Yes, Your Honor.
Move to strike, Your Honor.
Anything that's been elicited will be stricken.
Ms. Cabrera, let's move forward a little bit to August 14th of 2018. What happened that day?
Well, I had another meeting with Agatha for our biography. So we met at a nearby restaurant this time instead of the study.
What happened during this meeting?
Well, I noticed that Agatha was a little less talkative than she usually was, so I asked her what was wrong. She started to tell me about a conversation that she had with Stevie that morning that was troubling her a little bit.
What did that conversation entail?
She didn't give me a lot of details, but she did tell me that Stevie had asked her for something that morning and that she had to say no to her.
Objection to hearsay, Your Honor.
Your Honor, if I may?
Yes.
So, Your Honor, we have a good faith basis to believe that this the conversation that Miss Lee is referring to is the conversation that occurred in the study. It's the conversation where Miss Lee decides not to put Miss Rogers back in that will. Now, I understand there's been some contention about that during today's case, but even if Your Honor doesn't believe that that's the case, then we don't know what the conversation's about. And therefore, the no that Miss Lee gave to Miss Rogers has no meaning. It can't hold any truth value. If it can't hold any truth value, then it can't be hearsay under Rule 801.
I'm sorry, I'm a little confused. Can you, so what is the state, maybe I should ask your.
Yes, Your Honor. If I may.
Yes, you may.
Your Honor, defense counsel has a good faith basis to believe that during this conversation that Miss Lee is alluding to, that is the conversation where Miss Lee approaches Miss Rogers, where Miss Rogers approaches Miss Lee, excuse me, asks to be put back in the will, and Miss Lee responds, no. Now, we understand that Mr. Besman and Ms. Driscoll have differing views on that. They believe it didn't transpire the way that Mr. Paisley and I believe that it transpired. However, it doesn't matter, because even if Your Honor doesn't believe that's what the conversation is about, then there's no way to know truly what that conversation what surrounded that specific conversation. If we don't know what surrounded that conversation, it has no truth value. If it has no truth value, then it can't be considered hearsay under Rule 801.
All right, I think I should ask your opposing counsel, if you could articulate the basis of your objection, your hearsay objection.
Of course, Your Honor. The statement was, Stevie asked me for something. I had to tell Stevie no. Now, like Mr. Greenwald just said, they're using this statement to try to prove that Agatha Lee told Stevie Rogers no when Stevie Rogers allegedly asked to be put back into the will. That would be the truth of the matter asserted. That's hearsay.
Your Honor, if I may, once again.
So I think I'm not sure I'm entirely clear on the record about this, but I'm going to overrule the objection for now, just to develop what the testimony is, and I will allow you to re-object if there's a more clear instance of hearsay that I can recognize. So I'm going to overrule it for now.
Yes, Your Honor.
Now, Ms. Cabrera, you were just mentioning a conversation that you had with Miss Lee on August 14th, 2018. Well, what did that conversation entail?
Sure. So like I was saying, Agatha told me that Stevie had asked her for something and that she had to say no to her. She told me that she hoped that Stevie could forgive her.
Thank you.
Objection, Your Honor. At this point, I re-raise. It's pretty clear now that they're trying to talk about the conversation about the will.
Your Honor, if I may.
I think I know what you're going to say, so I'm not sure I need to hear it again. I now have a little bit of a better grasp of what's going on, and I think I will sustain the objection on the basis it was originally raised.
Move to strike, Your Honor.
Yes, stricken.
Ms. Cabrera, did anything else happen during that August 14th meeting?
Yeah. So after our conversation about Stevie, Agatha told me why she hadn't written anything besides For Death in a Bottle, which was a question that I had for her for months. She told me that she had written plenty of other books, but she never published them. And what's more, all of those books, they were in her study. I couldn't believe it. To think that I was sitting literal inches away from the unpublished works of Agatha Lee, that one question sparked a million more, but we agreed to speak more about it at our next meeting.
Ms. Cabrera, did that next meeting ever occur?
No, it didn't. The next morning, Drew had called to tell me that Agatha had passed away, and I couldn't believe it. I had no words.
Thank you for your time, Ms. Cabrera. Nothing further at this time, Your Honor.
Counsel, cross-examination.
Thank you, Your Honor. Good afternoon, Ms. Cabrera. I'd like to pick up right where you left off, all right?
Sure, good afternoon.
Now, you told us on direct examination that Agatha Lee was one of the most famous authors in the world, right?
Yes.
You would say at the time she passed away, she was the most famous mystery author in America.
Definitely.
But like you said, she'd only ever published one book.
That's right.
That was Death in a Bottle, right?
Yes.
And that was all the way back in the 60s.
Something like that, yes.
But you learned she had written several more.
I did, yes.
You just told us how important that information was to you, right?
Yes, I mean, Agatha's unpublished works were literary history.
You know that one of Agatha's books could be worth millions of dollars, right?
Um, I guess. I mean, I'm not really familiar with that kind of space and the valuing of unpublished books.
Well, her first book, it sold 65 million copies.
That's true.
And you know she had dozens of these unpublished books, right?
I did know that, yes.
You wanted them.
Yes, I wanted to read all of them.
Ma'am, you made a deal to get them.
I didn't make any kind of deal, no.
No kind of deal was made?
No.
Well, let's talk about that. You spoke with the defendant in June of this year, right?
I did, yes.
The defendant asked you to please testify in this trial today. Isn't that right?
She asked me if I'd be willing to, and I agreed.
Right. And after you'd agreed, the defendant said, on an unrelated note, is there anything that belonged to Agatha that you'd like to have?
Yeah, she asked me that after kind of asking me how I was doing and asked me if there was anything that I'd want to look over for my book.
Well, she didn't ask if there was anything you wanted to look over. She asked if there's anything you wanted to have. Isn't that right?
Yeah, I assumed it was related to my book.
Your mind went to those unpublished novels. Isn't that true?
That's right. I would love to include some stuff about that in my biography.
You thought to yourself, I can't even fathom how much those would be worth.
Yes.
Ma'am, when you asked the defendant for those books, the defendant said, sure, right?
Yes.
But there was a condition.
I didn't really see any conditions.
The defendant said she would let you have all of those unpublished books if she was in possession of Agatha's estate after this trial was over.
I mean, that's right, because she couldn't give them to me if she didn't win, but I would have just asked Stevie otherwise.
Ma'am, you feel confident that you're going to get those books from the defendant, right?
I mean, that's what I thought at the time, yes.
Ma'am, you think right now that because of your testimony today, you'll get those books from the defendant?
Yeah.
Now, I want to talk about something else you know about this defendant. You've seen this defendant giving Agatha Lee some pills, right?
I have, yes.
You know, that's part of her job.
Yes, I think she was a nurse as well, so she was her caretaker.
You remember one time back in May, you saw the defendant handing what looked like a purple pill to Agatha Lee, right?
That's right.
The defendant started to say what the pill was.
Yes.
Agatha Lee cut her off.
She did.
Agatha Lee said there's no reason for the recitation, sweetie. Isn't that right?
That's right.
She said, you know, I'll just take whatever you hand me.
That's what she said, yes.
Nothing further, Your Honor.
I'm sorry, I'm still on mute. Thank you, counsel. Is there any redirect for this witness?
No redirect, Your Honor. I just asked that Ms. Cabrera be excused.
All right, Ms. Cabrera, you are excused with the thanks of the court. My understanding is that your last witness, defense?
Yes, Your Honor. At this time, defense rests its case in chief, and we're ready to move directly into closing arguments.
Yes, so I understand by rule, we are moving directly to closing arguments. So at this point, I would recommend that the judges and the jurors switch their views back to speaker view in the top right corner of the Zoom. And I believe we will hear from the plaintiff first, closing argument.
Yes, Your Honor, thank you. May it please the court. It wasn't enough. At the beginning of trial today, the judge asked my co-counsel to introduce herself, and she said, "Good afternoon, Your Honor. My name is Madeline Driscoll, and I represent the plaintiff." She didn't pause. She didn't hesitate. She didn't have to. There was nothing else to say because that was the truth. You see, the truth is easy. It never changes, no matter who's asking, when, or why. But that isn't the way that the truth works for the defendant. In February of 2018, the defendant sends her friend an email saying, I just found out that when Agatha Lee dies, I get everything. I mean, the money, the house, everything. Then when people are watching her and the stakes are high, she says, oh my God, I had no idea that if Agatha Lee died, I would get everything. The money, the house, everything. Members of the jury, throughout that entire time, the truth never changed, but the defendant's story did. That's because the defendant couldn't tell the truth. Because if this defendant wanted to get what she needed, the truth wouldn't be enough. You see, this defendant stood to gain everything from Agatha Lee's death. We know that that $20 million was something that the defendant needed. She had a sister who was sick. Those medical bills were piling higher and higher, but she knew that as long as she had the windfall from Agatha Lee's death coming, eventually she'd be able to pay everything off. But then on August 14th, the defendant overheard a conversation. She heard Agatha Lee tell Stevie Rogers, you know what, I think I'm going to put you back in the will, and I'm going to take Drew Mars out of it. Members of the jury, the defendant couldn't let that happen. She thought about her savings, she thought about her salary, and she thought about her bills and realized it just wasn't enough. So she said, no way. She went to a pharmacy. She bought a bottle of chlorandramine, a drug that this trained nurse knew would kill Agatha Lee, and used it for exactly that. Agatha Lee died because she trusted this defendant. And that's why we're here today. Now, before you came to court, you might never have heard the word Slayer statute before, but you probably could have guessed that a plan like the defendant's isn't legal. The law tells us that if you kill somebody, you can't benefit from their death. Now, I want to be clear, this isn't a criminal case. I'm not a government attorney, and the defendant enjoys no presumption of innocence today. It isn't our job to prove anything beyond a reasonable doubt. To prevail under the Slayer statute, all we need to show by a preponderance of the evidence, just meaning more likely than not, is that the defendant purposefully caused Agatha Lee to die. So when you're thinking about that, I want you to ask yourself a question. What would an innocent person do if they found an otherwise healthy woman had died under suspicious circumstances? Would they want an investigation? Maybe an autopsy? If they thought they were being framed, certainly they'd want those things. This defendant didn't want any of them. We learned today that when this defendant found Agatha Lee dead, well, the first thing she said was, we need to cremate her. Then the police came, the investigators came, and the defendant kept saying, we just have to cremate her. Members of the jury, there's a reason the defendant didn't want an investigation. But that wasn't enough for the police. So the police said, hey, do you mind if we look in your room? You know, they've been around the entire rest of the house, so what's the problem with going into her room? The defendant said, no, absolutely not. Nobody gets to see what I have in my room. Today we learned why. Because members of the jury, the police came back and they found inside the defendant's closet a black bag filled with a bottle of those chlorandramine pills that killed Agatha Lee. But today the defense wants you to ignore all of that. Today the defense wants you to say that, well, she lied, but maybe she was just nervous. All right, she wouldn't let anybody search and she wanted the body cremated, but maybe she was just angry. Okay, that evidence was found in her closet. I don't know, maybe it was planted. Now, members of the jury, in a civil preponderance case, that's a pretty weak defense to begin with. But today we can prove it isn't true. That's because there were forensic tests done on that black bag with the chlorandramine pills inside. And they found a 16-point match for the defendant's right thumb on the zipper of that black bag. And there is just no way to explain that away. The defense wants to say this was all a frame job by Stevie Rogers, or maybe a frame job by Marco Bond. Well, then how did either of them get the defendant's fingerprints onto that bag? They couldn't. They didn't. Now, members of the jury, we can all sympathize with the defendant. We know her family was strapped for cash. We know her sister was deathly ill, and nobody deserves that. But Agatha Lee didn't deserve to die either. Agatha Lee was kind to the defendant. Agatha Lee tried to help the defendant. She gave her a job, a roof over her head, food, money, anything she wanted, all of it, but none of it was enough. Agatha Lee gave this defendant a good life, but it wasn't enough. So the defendant took another life, too. Find her liable. Thank you.
Thank you, counsel. We'll now hear from the defense.
Yes, Your Honor. Your Honor, can you see and hear me okay?
I can.
It wasn't enough. That's what Mr. Besman just came up here and told you. He tried to tell you that that Drew Mars, a woman who had known Agatha Lee for the better part of a decade, would suddenly change just like that and murder her. That Drew Mars would intentionally poison her boss, her friend, a person who she considered family, for money. Members of the jury, what if I were to tell you that Stevie Rogers' knowledge of August 14th, the shoddy investigation conducted by Marco Bond and Detective Kahn, and plaintiff counsel's entire case, could be explained by one simple principle? They saw what Stevie Rogers wanted them to see. Now, it's not enough for Mr. Besman to just come up here and tell you that it wasn't enough. He had to prove it to you. Now, today, plaintiff counsel has elected to sue Miss Mars under the Slayer statute. This means they had to prove two things to you: that Miss Mars intended to kill Miss Lee, and that her actions caused her death. And that's not what we heard about today. Today, the plaintiff has tried to paint you a picture of somebody who was desperate. So desperate, they didn't care about who or what stood in their way. They saw that Agatha Lee had money. They wanted it for themselves. But members of the jury, plaintiff counsel has been focusing on the wrong person. The real culprit? The person who would do anything and everything to get what they wanted? That was Stevie Rogers. Miss Rogers gained access to a $2 million trust fund in 2008. By 2018, that money was completely gone. So what did she do? Well, she did what she always did when she needed money. She called her grandmother. But her grandmother had had enough. You heard as much in the letter that she wrote to Miss Rogers. I'm writing you out of my will, and I'm leaving everything to Drew Mars. And then she changes her address so that Miss Rogers can't find her. Miss Rogers doesn't get her job. She doesn't finish those tourism novels that she started. No, she decides to spend $10,000 and hire a private investigator. Now, that investigator was Marco Bond. And he finds Miss Lee in just 2 days. And soon after, Miss Rogers shows up on Miss Lee's doorstep. But she's not interested in rekindling her relationship with her grandmother. She has her eyes set on one thing and one thing only: the inheritance that she thought was rightfully hers. And when Miss Lee doesn't put her back in that will, doesn't make Miss Rogers the sole heir to her $20 million estate, Miss Rogers got mad. Now, I understand there's been differing issues on how this conversation played out. For members of the jury, think about it. Miss Rogers wanted that money. $2 million? That wasn't enough. But 20 million? She'd be set for the rest of her life. She knew her grandmother was allergic to chloroandramine. She knew that if she ingested that chloroandramine, she would die. And she knew exactly who to blame it on. And Mr. Besman was right. Not many people know about the Slayer statute, but one person did. And that was Stevie Rogers. Why did she know? Because members of the jury, Miss Rogers was the one that did it. So how does she do it? She switches out those 2 pills and she waits. You heard her on cross-examination. She had every opportunity throughout the day of August 14th to be able to do so. She waits and waits and waits until Drew Mars bursts into her room and tells her grandmother isn't breathing. Miss Rogers, she calls Mr. Bond. She doesn't say my grandmother passed away in her sleep. She doesn't say, I think there's something wrong with her. Members of the jury, she says she was murdered. How did she know that without any evidence, without doing any tests, without gathering anything? It's because she was the one that did it. She pays $25,000 for Mr. Bond to do his investigation. Mind you, this is money that she simply doesn't have. And look at what that $25,000 bought her. Mr. Bond has never been a police officer. He has no criminal justice training, no training on how to handle a crime scene, but that didn't matter. Because Mr. Bond was willing to do something that a police officer wouldn't. Break into somebody's room, open up their computer, hack their email, and not tell a soul about it. He never considered Miss Rogers a suspect, never considered it suspicious that she cried murder from the beginning, despite the fact that he claims to be an impartial investigator. But members of the jury, you know that can't be true. Because he saw what Stevie Rogers wanted him to see. Members of the jury, I get it. This case is a lot to take in. There's a lot of moving parts to this case, a lot of things that appear to be one thing when in actuality, they're different. The plaintiff counsel has been telling you time after time after time that it wasn't enough. And they're right. It wasn't enough to be the beneficiary of a $2 million trust fund. It wasn't enough that she had to put Miss Mars on trial for a crime that she didn't commit. It's not enough to create an investigation without any evidence. No. She had to take Miss Lee's life too. That wasn't enough. Now, at the beginning of trial today, my co-counsel, Mr. Pies LeMay, came before you, and he told you that Stevie Rogers saw what she wanted to see. Marco Bond saw what she wanted to see. Miss Driscoll and Mr. Besman saw what she wanted to see. And now she wants you, members of the jury, to see what she wants her to see. Now, I'm asking you to look at what the evidence wants you to see. Because it only shows you one thing. And that's the truth. That's why I'm asking you to render the only verdict that the evidence supports and that reason requires. Find Drew Mars not liable for a crime that she didn't commit. Thank you.
Thank you, counsel. Is there any rebuttal by the plaintiff?
Yes, Your Honor, there is. The police saw what Stevie Rogers wanted them to see. I guess that's true. Because Stevie Rogers wanted them to see everything. Stevie Rogers told the police, yes, please investigate. Please do an autopsy. Please do a tox screen. Please search every corner of this house until you know every fact of this case. Stevie Rogers wanted the police to see everything because Stevie Rogers had nothing to hide. But it isn't just about what Stevie Rogers has shown you. It's about what the defendant has tried to cover up, too. Because members of the jury, this defendant lied, accused, and hid to prevent you from learning anything about what happened to Agatha Lee. Unfortunately, it didn't work. Today, you've seen what the defendant never wanted you to. And that's why I'm confident you're going to find her liable. Thank you.
Thank you, counsel.